We assess the speech and what it means for politics with the deputy editor of the Conservative Home website, Henry Hill, and Rachel Cunliffe, the associate political editor of the New Statesman magazine. Henry, so what was your general impressions of Sunak's speech?
I thought the speech, it teed itself up to be something which it really wasn't. You know, the first 10 minutes he was talking about, we've been doing politics wrong for 30 years. We've been making decisions the wrong way, and therefore we've been making the wrong decisions. And he was really setting up, or at least he seemed to be setting up, a big structural analysis of how he was going to change the way we did politics. And he didn't do any of that. That was just followed by a series of announcements. Now, you know, we can get to the subject, the content of those announcements in a minute, but I think that was actually really disappointing because he's right. I think there's an awful lot of justice to the claim that we have been making decisions wrong for quite a long time. I actually think that, as you know, Chancellor, he made quite a few of those decisions himself, but it was really disappointing that it ended up turning into just a scattershot series of announcements. And the big thing that was absolutely extraordinary was the total absence of any talk about housing. It was actually a fairly big issue at Conservative Party conference. There were multiple fringe events that were packed to the rafters talking about housing, and yet there was not a mention of it, not rents, not home ownership, nothing in Rishi Sunak's speech. It was extraordinary.
Rachel, so what was your impression?
I would echo a lot of what Henry just said. Of course, we are comparing Rishi Sunak's speech this year to Liz Truss's speech last year, where she went on a rant about the anti-growth coalition, people who live in London and take taxis to TV broadcasting studios. And so compared to that, there was more substance there. There were policies. The issue I would have is that those policies were very diverse and there didn't seem to be much holding them together. There was HS2 and the announcement that money would be diverted onto different infrastructure and transport projects. There was the combination of T-levels and A-levels, education reform. There was a policy about making sure that young people will never be able to buy cigarettes. That's a health policy. It wasn't really clear what was uniting them together, other than, I suppose, they don't cost very much money, and Rishi Sunak doesn't smoke and really cares about maths. But if you were looking for some kind of grand vision to end this conference, which has been quite a divisive and fractious conference, I would say, this speech didn't really seem to do that.
Henry, you've got your ear to the ground within the party. What were the delegates saying about it? What was the response from the wider party?
Oh, I mean, the response of the wider party, we will have to see, because we haven't surveyed them yet, and I don't think anyone else has either. The people in the hall, it seems to go down very well with them. Obviously, that is a fraction of a fraction. You're selecting a small group, a small minority of the Conservative membership in that hall, and the Conservative membership is a small fraction of the country. So I don't know how typical they are. But again, I think a lot of these measures will have been focus grouped. You know, the cigarette ban, I think it's probably going to be a very bad policy if it happens, but it will be popular. Scrapping HS2 is deeply unpopular with many of the Conservative grassroots. So I imagine each individually, many of these policies will go down well. But it was striking the way that so often, you know, he was talking about being the change candidate. That's obviously very hard when your party has been in office for 13 years, but it is remarkable the extent to which he was repudiating other Conservative policies and achievements. You know, the T-level announcement, for example. Now, the Conservatives put a lot of effort into trying to create T-levels, which in England are a technical qualification which is supposed to be separate from, but of equal status to, the more academic A-level. It's T-levels week, and the DfE is actually this week promoting the virtues of T-levels. They're just getting rolled back into a new you know, standard universal qualification. He also attacked the narrowness of the curriculum. Now, Michael Gove has made a big push as part of the English baccalaureate, so-called, to narrow the focus of the curriculum onto what was considered to be core subjects. So in a way, he is being the change candidate by throwing his predecessors' policies and achievements overboard.
And we'll come back to this idea of him being a change candidate, but Rachel, as Henry said, he scrapped the second leg of the HS2 project. How will voters respond to that? You know, how many people will actually care about that?
Well, as Henry said, HS2 is not the most popular transport infrastructure project, and costs have really spiralled. And I think everyone who I spoke to at conference wanted to know why that had happened. I would say that the party who has been in power for the last 13 years maybe has something to do with the spiralling of those costs. But it wasn't just that it had been scrapped, it was the way that it was announced. So there were rumours that HS2 would be scrapped a couple of weeks ago. On the eve of conference, we were discussing it, so there was speculation. And every single broadcast round that the Prime Minister or one of his cabinet did during conference, they were asked this question about HS2, and they had to deflect it. They had to say, well, no decision has been made, wait and see what he says. Lo and behold, he said exactly what everyone expected him to say before conference, but after 4 days of frenzied speculation and real anger from a number of Northern MPs and Northern Conservative mayors, indeed, who are absolutely furious about this. So even if you believe that scrapping HS2 was the right policy, the communications rollout was incredibly strange. And there are a lot of questions about what that infrastructure spending is now going to be spent on. The announcement suggested it would be reallocated for a number of projects in the north. If you look at the fine print, actually a sizable amount of it is going to be for fixing potholes on roads south of England. Now, I think we should fix potholes wherever they emerge, but it's a really big shift from let's build a brand new railway that we've been talking about for over a decade to let's fix some potholes in England.
Yeah, Henry, as you mentioned earlier, Sunak was presenting himself as a candidate for change. I mean, how credible is that? I mean, the Tories have been in power for the last 13 years.
They have, in fairness, managed to do this multiple times already. You know, they've managed to change Prime Minister, they've got a bounce, and they've achieved a reset with the public to an extent, and they worked to an extraordinary degree. But I think the problem is that there are diminishing returns, and there have been diminishing returns every time they've done it. And Rishi Sunak is, what, the fifth Conservative Prime Minister since 2010? And each time they've done it, they've left more divisions behind them. The Conservative Party has been less united, it's had less clear vision. You know, think back to 2019, which now feels like a lifetime ago, and that manifesto, which is still the manifesto that Conservative MPs were elected on, and how many times we've seen bits of that ripped up and thrown out by different candidates. It's going to be very difficult. And I think, frankly, it's a very strange pitch, right? There are other lines of division that Rishi Sunak could have gone for. He could have tried to play up technocratic competence versus Labour's sort of untested front bench. Now, I'm not saying that would have necessarily won the election either. I don't know what will, but change when your party's been in power in one form or another since 2010 is an absolutely extraordinary choice of dividing line.
Rachel, has Rishi Sunak come out of this conference stronger or weaker?
Well, it wasn't as disastrous as predecessor's first conference as Prime Minister, so I guess we can give it that. But I was thinking about those policies together and what they actually build up to, and the number one issue, if you poll voters at the moment, that they are concerned about is still the economy. It's the cost of living crisis, and then just below it, it's the NHS and the fact that they can't access healthcare treatment and can't get a doctor's appointment. Now, Henry said that he believes that the smoking policy, banning cigarettes and increasing the age at which you can buy cigarettes, so that somebody who's 16 now will never be able to buy them their entire life, that might poll quite well and be quite popular with the public. But I'm struggling to think of a voter who is worried about their mortgage, worried about the increased cost of their weekly supermarket shop, who can't get a doctor's appointment, and who's concerned that their child isn't doing well at school because they haven't caught up from the lost learning during COVID, who suddenly goes, but at least my child will never be able to buy cigarettes. I'm going to vote for Rishi Sunak. I just don't think that voter.
Okay, Rachel and Henry, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Speak to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.